Hello, everybody. My name is Andrew Fichter, and I'm going to be co-presenting today with Maria. Maria is a senior UX researcher on the VA Lighthouse API program, and I'm really excited to hear about all the things that she's going to be talking about today because I think it's really important. So currently on screen is slide 1, which is just the title slide, Discovery Research for APIs, Why and How, and it has our names on this slide. I am a white male with brown hair, and I'm wearing a gray striped shirt right now. And I have string lights behind me as I'm sitting in my basement. Okay, on to slide 2. Okay, so this slide just has an agenda. It's listing out the items that we're going to cover in today's talk. I will just go through these bullet items really quickly before moving on. First thing we're going to talk about is what are VA Lighthouse APIs, what is the impact, and then why do discovery for APIs? Why do we do research, and how do we do research for APIs, including methods, questions, and learnings from the research, and then we'll conclude with key takeaways. So moving on to slide 3. Okay, what are VA Lighthouse APIs? Well, if we go on to slide 4, there's a quick answer to this question. We are now looking at slide 4. The quick answer is APIs are digital pipes that connect UIs to backend systems. And I'll go a little bit deeper than that and talk about the specifics with VA APIs. So VA Lighthouse, Lighthouse is the name of VA's API program, which was launched back in 2018. The API program was kind of born out of a larger effort to redesign VA.gov and make it a lot more veteran-centered. So that whole experience of VA.gov, that was a huge undertaking that was launched in 2018, actually on Veterans Day. And as part of that initiative to redesign VA.gov, a lot of APIs were created as part of that process. And there were some really great forward-thinking people within VA who looked at APIs and said, well, if we're using this internally and it's helping us, it would probably be great to open up APIs to external users, third parties who interact with the VA to help improve their interactions with the VA. And so API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's actually not a very user-friendly name. I don't know if that really means anything to anyone when they hear it. And APIs as a concept have existed, for decades, but they are more and more driving modern technology. And really APIs are a way to interconnect systems and to expose data in a very seamless fashion. So, when you think about user experience, designing an API to make it easy to get the data you need or to perform the action that you need is really important. And we're able to do that through a good API design. Okay, moving on to slide 5. Okay, on slide 5, we have a picture here of a wall socket with a bunch of unplugged plugs, unplugged cords that look like they're about ready to be plugged into the wall socket. And that wall socket represents the VA Lighthouse APIs. One analogy that I've heard about APIs that I think is really helpful is that they kind of similar to plugging into a wall socket. When you're plugging a hairdryer into the wall, you're not thinking about where the electricity is coming from. You're not thinking about how the electricity is generated. You just know that you want to get that electricity, and the plug knows. The plug is designed to be standardized, and any plug that fits into it will have electricity delivered through it. That's kind of the same thing for APIs. With APIs, the user or the system that is connecting to the API doesn't care about which backend system the data is coming from. It doesn't care about the operations internally of the VA or whichever business they're connecting to. And it's just a really simple, abstracted way to communicate with systems. And so our program, the VA Lighthouse API program, we offer a portfolio of services that interface with third parties who do a lot of interaction with the VA. A primary example is veteran service organizations. And I'll talk about that actually a little bit in the next slide. So moving on to slide 6. So APIs help solve problems at VA. As I mentioned during the whole VA.gov redesign, the need for APIs became very clear. And we started thinking a lot about how there's problems in the private sector or problems outside of VA, with third parties interacting with VA. We can solve the problems that they have in those interactions. And one of those is applying for VA benefits. That's actually one of the biggest services that the VA offers to veterans, like applying for disability compensation after they've been in service. And just applying for VA benefits was a really, really dated process with like paper forms and really, having to fax or mail in the form to the VA and then having to be manually input into VA systems. So we designed an API to allow that to happen digitally and to allow representatives who are helping veterans using software to actually generate a digital PDF and hit a button and send it to the VA automatically. All right, on to slide 7. Okay, so who integrates with VA Lighthouse benefits and appeals APIs? VA.gov is a big one, as I mentioned, during the whole VA.gov redesign. The APIs were built that kind of power VA.gov. Third-party vendors, as I described, VSOs, veteran service organizations. So veteran service organizations, just to be clear, are places where veterans can go for assistance, like, assistance applying for disability compensation, which is a really, really arduous process. And with some complicated forms, and the more help you can get, and the more advocacy you can get, through these VSOs who are trained and who know how to help a veteran get the benefits that they're entitled to, they can really advocate for them. So VSOs are a place where veterans, they go to do that. Also veteran law offices. So if a veteran is filing an appeal, for example, they could work with a lawyer. And then there's county VSOs, and that's just kind of an extension of the VSOs that I just discussed. Okay, slide 8. We're talking about impact right now. So I'm going to go through a couple of metrics on the next slide of key indicators. Okay, so there's 2 impact indicators that I thought made a lot of sense to tell the story here. One is 25%. That indicator, 25%, represents the number of digital appeal submissions on VA.gov that come through the appeals API that we developed that allows veterans to apply to submit an appeals form for a higher level review. So basically, if a veteran applies for disability compensation and they don't get a favorable response from the VA, maybe they're denied compensation, they can file an appeal. And before we built this API that allows an appeal form to be submitted digitally, they had to submit a paper form. So this form or this API powers a form on VA.gov. And since we launched this functionality last year or earlier this year, we have seen 25% of all submissions for this form type coming in through VA.gov and through our API, which is huge. And then the second indicator is 55,000. That's the number of forms that were digitally submitted in April of 2021 through our benefits intake API, which allows VSOs to digitally submit benefits forms. And this number has really grown a lot. When we launched this API back in 2018, I think we were at under 1,000 submissions, and we've been tracking those milestones all along. And here we are now, and earlier this year we had a month where we had 55,000 submissions, which I think speaks to the usage of these APIs. And now, as Maria will talk about, what goes into building these APIs and making them user-friendly and easy to use.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Andrew, so much. So my name is Maria Vidart-Delgado. I am a senior researcher with VA Lighthouse APIs, as Andrew mentioned. I am a Latina woman with long brown hair, and I'm wearing a black crochet top. So as we have conducted extensive discovery research projects for the benefits and appeals APIs, as Andrew mentioned as well, like this success and impact has been built on making sure that the APIs are usable. And I'll now walk you through why we do it and the way we do this discovery research and how we do it. So before we dig into the why of discovery, let me give you some context. So there are different phases and different types of UX work for APIs. And here in this slide, which is slide number 12, here is a diagram of how we approach the UX cycle. So first, there's discovery, where we aim to understand the real world problems that APIs will solve, and where we focus in deeply understanding the complexities of VA processes, the policy frameworks, the legal constraints, and the requirements of internal systems, and also in deeply understanding the people who interact with those systems and their motivations, needs, and roadblocks that they face. Once we understand what the API will do, there's a phase of architecting the API, what we call define. And it involves defining naming conventions, naming resources, mapping out functions, writing documentation, and how to use it in a way that makes sense to developers who, in some cases, will not be familiar with the API, of course, because we are the ones writing it and architecting it. And in some cases, they're not familiar with VA's internal processes and terminology. And then after that architecting or define phase, we focus UX focused resources on ensuring that developers can easily use the API and its documentation. So we go through a concept feedback process to uncover potential problems and like big problems. And after this, like this initial feedback that we get, we then move on to usability testing. And this resonates with what Tate was talking about before in the previous presentation. We invest those resources there to get, basically we incorporate that initial feedback of the concept feedback into prototypes and designs that then get tested more widely to establish benchmarks and validate those designs. And with changes to the API, like new versions or tweaks in the documentation, and depending on how big these changes are, then this will trigger new cycles of research. I'm focusing on the phase of discovery here with a green box highlighting the discovery phase. This initial phase of discovery ensures that the team is solving the right problems with the API and doing it in a way that makes sense within existing regulations and policy frameworks at VA. So differently from the other UX phases for APIs, discovery for APIs is centered around end users who can be both external to VA, like veterans who are seeking to apply to a benefit or appeal a benefit, or internal to VA, like claims review officers who are reviewing those applications. We seek to understand all of that, like the different users interacting with the system. And is geared towards understanding processes and services end to end, the people involved in those processes and services, the pain points they experience, and what they are trying to accomplish. And lastly, it strives to define and delineate problems. So what can be solved with a technical solution, like teasing apart what can be solved with a technical solution and what is actually a policy problem, which is something that we face often. So to summarize, why do discovery research for APIs? We do it to ensure the API solves the right problem. If it doesn't, developers won't know what to build with it. And if developers don't know what to build with it, you can't UX your way to adoption. So we will talk now about how we conduct discovery research, the methods we use, the questions we ask, and what we've learned. And I will use a specific example of our work. So we use an ethnographic approach to understanding the benefits and appeals application and adjudication processes at VA. So an ethnographic approach, I know big word, is akin to systems thinking. So consider that ethnography is the main method that anthropologists use, and it was developed to study cultures, which anthropology commonly approaches systems of shared meaning. So an ethnographic approach asks how large systems are set up, to what end, and their organizing principles. We use ethnographic methods in line with this ethnographic approach. And we have conducted many interviews, over 65 interviews with veteran representatives and VA staff to understand how different individuals interact with these services. We regularly also conduct qualitative interviews that focus on people's experiences of these services. We also conduct contextual inquiries, remote contextual inquiries, to observe how they do their work in their own work environments, asking them, for example, to share their screens as they process and intake a claim or an appeal. And we do collaborative process mapping exercises where we ask participants to work with us on mapping out their understanding of a process. And we focus these methods on understanding information needs, pain points, and points of confusion. And here's an example of the types of questions we regularly ask in these discovery initiatives. So like these are the questions, like the big questions that are guiding how we are approaching these studies. So one of them is, are there gaps between codified processes and practices on the ground? Or are there differences in how individuals involved interpret the process? Or what are the different goals that individuals are trying to achieve? Or for example, what is a benefit claim or appeal and according to whom? Because sometimes it can mean different things to different people, and that's when there are mismatches in interpretation. So through this discovery research process, we have learned that, and like this is a specific learning uncovered through discovery. Representatives are primarily looking for a confirmation of receipt when they submit an application, right? And this because effective dates and deadlines are central to how veteran benefits work. But they don't always get the information they need, so they end up submitting duplicates to make sure the application has been received. And there's a lot of anxiety about making sure that the application has been received by VA. And this in turn, like these duplicates end up backlogging VA's processing systems and delaying the review process, which causes stress and anxiety to claimants, as you can imagine. We use what we call data abstraction maps to map our findings. And here I'm showing a representation of one of those maps. And we use these maps to map out the actions individuals take to process or intake data, the systems of record they use, the data they review, and the mistakes they encounter, and compare these processes to the needs of end users. So like in these data abstraction maps, there's a process of transforming the data into something. There's, for example, there's what the veteran writes initially in a form, which is usually a story, like, or something that happened to them. And those stories get transformed into data that is easily readable by VA systems. So we use these maps to architect the APIs and build the necessary validation logic. And we're currently working on informative status endpoints for representatives that are also legally compliant with all of the regulations at VA. So to wrap up, why do discovery research for APIs and how to do it? We want to leave you with some key takeaways. API usability entails having the right API functionality. That's the first key takeaway. The second key takeaway is that an ethnographic approach is very powerful to understand complex service systems and how digital solutions interact with those service systems. And the third takeaway is that ethnographic questions emphasize understanding gaps between norms and on-the-ground practices, and they're very powerful as well to frame how those processes work. These types of questions lend to understanding how individuals interact with a system and the information that they need from an API. And to restate what Andrew mentioned earlier, the goal of our APIs is to serve veterans, and by serving the data they need to make better service for them. And this is like in one of our participants in a study at County VSO, he put it beautifully. we don't have the time to help all the veterans. And you know, like I said, 10 people helping 50,000 veterans is almost untenable. You can't do it. Meanwhile, we're fighting budgets at the county. Some of the things that I see that can help us is being able to process claims more efficiently. That's why I'm very interested in all of these API solutions. And that's it. Thank you. If you have any questions, I think we don't have any time, but I'm gonna drop my LinkedIn in the chat. And if you have any questions, just like connect with me. I'm happy to chat always. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Andrew. That was a great presentation. This is Jean again. And yes, we are out of time, unfortunately, but thank you for sharing your contact so that people can contact you for more questions. There were a couple that came in. So thank you, everyone.